When dealers were presented with brochures of the car, even before they had seen it, they marveled that they would have such a car to sell. People liked it, in many cases, in the same way they liked a horse, and they gave them nicknames, Old Betsy or Liz.
Tough and durable, Lizzie could really perform. Putting out 20 horsepower. On a good day, the T could hit 40 miles per hour. With a wheelbase only 100 inches long, it could turn on a dime.
It was the Model T more than any other vehicle which really caught the farmer's fancy. It required a minimum number of repairs. The engine itself was very simple. Farmers had had experience with gasoline engines before, and so they were able to keep their car up themselves.
You got a toolkit with the car, you got the jack and the tire pump and wrenches, the screwdriver, and an oil can, and most anyone could fix these cars.
No air conditioning, no power steering, no power brakes, or you could pretty much fix anything that went wrong with them.
A radiator sometimes got holes in it. The farmers would just take a raw egg, pour the contents of that raw egg into the radiator, and the heat of the water would basically boil the egg into where the holes were in the radiator and seal them. A car that was capable of being repaired that way had a great deal of appeal to the farmer.
The Model T was easy to keep running, but not always easy to start.
There was a real process to get a car started in the wintertime. And it was mostly due to the oil in them that was so heavy. They used 40 and 50 grade weight oil.
One time, one of the neighbors couldn't get it started, so he took the oil in the house and he put it in the oven, and I don't know whether he forgot or got warm too quick or what, it exploded and burned the house down, and they had to build a new house. So I think everybody learned from that to take it out fast.
Back in the 1900s, in rural America, life was often hard and lonely. In places like Oregon, Illinois, the car would prove a godsend.
When I was young, we went with horse and buggy. It would take the better part of half a day to go and do your shopping. I remember going many times with my mother into town, but we didn't go that often because it was a different.
People who'd scarce dreamed of an auto just 5 years before were now discovering how the car would change their lives. No one ever forgot their first drive. Hazel McCourt was 12 years old.
He said, "You want to ride?" Well, I had never ridden in a car before. And I says, "Do I want to ride?" I says, "I sure do." He had a two-seater, but he had the top down. And that was better yet. We got in there. He took us down to the depot, which was a mile away. Boy, was that I never will forget it. The wind was just beautiful.
Once in a while, we'd ride with my dad up to Grandma's, see, and we'd stand up in the back seat. I can't imagine. We stood on the floor in the back, and we'd say, "Go fast, Pa, go fast." And he'd step on it a little. Oh, we'd just giggle. We thought that was great.
Farmers were rather creative in their use of automobiles. They did not see them as purely means of passenger conveyance. And as a result of that, frequently the cars themselves were modified in various ways. An incredible number of devices were put on the market which used the axle as a means of power to drive some other mechanism.
Cars were used to saw wood, grind grain, even run a washing machine.
My dad used to haul everything in the car, in the back seat, even newborn calves, and it'd be kind of a mess. Once in a while, my mother would complain. She always had to clean it out, but she was pretty good about it.
For many rural women, the car promised escape.
It was a tremendous freedom for the farm woman who spent her life toiling not 5 days a week, but 6, but 7 days a week in that farm. And when they went into town, that was freedom, really freedom for that lady.
Well, you could go, go places without depending on somebody to take you, a man to take you. And that was quite a privilege. Just take a ride, get out of the house. Yeah, women years ago, they never even got out of the house.
What Henry Ford had in mind when he invented the Model T was every man's car, and he meant that quite literally. What ended up happening, however, was that a lot of rural women said when they got a hold of that Model T, this is my ticket to anywhere I want to go. And so the Model T considerably lessened the isolation and really the dreariness of rural life in the United States.
By 1915, even in small towns, the car was commonplace. 1 million Model Ts had now been sold. Out in the country, the Model T was better than most negotiating the rutted roads. But sometimes, the roads were even more than Lizzie could handle. Joy Fischel remembers.
Daddy started home to Nebraska City in his Model T Ford, and it had rained and rained and rained, and the mud was so thick you couldn't walk in it, and of course up in that direction you've got this old what they call gumbo, and it's kind of like driving in about 6 inches of axle grease, and it built up so much under the fenders on his car that he actually couldn't turn the wheels. So he tore the fenders off the car and threw them in the ditch and went on home.
It was clear to Henry Ford that business would bog down unless he got the Model T out of the mud. To sell the country on building new roads, he launched an extraordinary publicity campaign.
Henry Ford felt that motion pictures would be an important medium for educating the public. So in 1914, he set up the best equipped motion picture studio in the country. Not even Hollywood had anything to equal it in those early days. And he began producing a series, a weekly series called the Ford Animated Weekly, which we would think of today as a newsreel.
Seen by 5 million people, Ford's films featured farm trucks speeding to market on smooth paved roads. Children riding to school on paved roads. Suddenly, little towns across America were in the road business. And there was even talk of a superhighway.
The idea was to have a coast-to-coast highway, and they chose the name Lincoln Highway. Soon, this town and that town wanted to be part of the Lincoln Highway, and they had a really curious way to get people interested. They built something called a seedling mile. They'd plant a little seed by taking a stretch of old, dilapidated, rutted, foul, impassable road, and they'd lay down what was then the prettiest ribbon of highway you've ever seen, a wonderful mile-long strip of concrete. And so the early automobilists would eventually poke their way along and up onto this new ribbon of highway, and suddenly the car came alive, and the 20th century was born, and that addiction to the car was instilled, and the foot went on the accelerator, and the landscape picked up speed in the windshield, and they glided along that seedling mile, but just for a mile, and then back down in the mud, sloshing along to the next town.
The nearest seedling mile to Oregon was about 30 miles away. The effect of the Lincoln Highway was exactly as the founders of the Lincoln Highway Association hoped. People went to this section, they then came back and they said, we here in Ogle County, we here in Oregon, ought to begin doing things with the roads as the Lincoln Highway had done.
Paved roads had a funny habit of turning up in front of rich men's houses.
We had Governor Loudon living here, and there was a Loudon Road because he had that paved with tar all the way out to his house. So when we went for a ride, we went out the Loudon Road.
Paving roads was a very expensive process. And so just after World War I, the state highway officials all got together and said, we really want to pave roads, but the federal government's going to have to help us do it. And that was the beginning then of the National Highway Movement.